Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Yoga Well podcast. I am your host, Chase Bossart, Executive Director of the Yoga Well Institute. And today I have with me a longtime student and friend, Grazia Jaroff, who was the Director of Systems Engineering and Communication at UC Davis and has been a long-time student of Vini Yoga and of Mr. Deśikachar's teachings. And it's such a pleasure to have you on today, Grazia.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell me a little bit about how did you get interested in yoga and how did you find Vini Yoga, etc.?
Well, it started with shoulder surgery, rotator cuff. After the second rotator cuff surgery, my surgeon said, why don't you try yoga as a rehabilitation practice? And so I did. I found a teacher here in Davis, Ann Rogers, who was a student of Mr. Deśikachar, although at the time I was totally oblivious to that concept. And
Right.
so I started taking her classes, and I immediately had an affinity for it because she was already integrating things like movement and breath and concepts and some reflection. And she was also, although we didn't call it Vini Yoga at the time, at least not that I remember, but she was giving personal suggestions, for instance, acupressure points while we were doing movements. And she would make useful suggestions to people individually. So that seemed to me like something worth following. And so I went to her for a while. And I also saw the benefits very quickly. Just because at that time I was at the peak of my career, insane pressures to do more long hours. We would be at work sites at 6 o'clock in the morning and then work through the night for some breakthrough, etc. So the work life was so difficult that some slight relief, like an hour of yoga, was really palpable. It helped a whole lot. So that went on. And in addition, at the time, there was additional pressure in the sense that I was on a national board for several years. And so it was a group of 150 people, all men, 2 women, Christine from Stanford and myself from University of California. And so the pressure to have to prove yourself, to cut through all the old boy network was so intense that the relief from yoga was so welcome.
How long ago is this?
Late 80s.
Okay.
I think I met Anne around 88, 89. Yeah. It was a long time ago. And so with Anne, she never used the word mentor as such. And she never really give me, we were one-to-one, but she never really gave me a practice like we do now. It was more like a series of questions and a series of suggestions, which I also took very well too. And at the time, Kaustubh Desikachar had started to formalize the certification programs that were given in Chennai. And there was a provision for those of us who had been studying for a while to grandfather us into the program, continuing to take new classes, but also gave us credit for the old stuff. And the old stuff, when I look back on it now, is really interesting It's hundreds of longhand, beautiful calligraphy written pages of postures, breath descriptions, etc. But I'm talking hundreds of pages of
Yes.
figures and descriptions of functions and everything that you cover now, except it was all in handwritten pages. And it was contributions from someone named Martine,
Mm-hmm.
either from the Colgate group or the
Mm-hmm.
upstate New York
Mm-hmm.
group. I'm not quite sure what the origin
So,
was.
yeah, so Martine worked with the Upstate Yoga Center, I think, which was
Yoga Institute.
Institute, yeah, which
Yeah,
is in Syracuse, New York. And
yeah,
they were connected with Mary Lou Skelton, who was the longtime student of Mr. Deśikachar's, and she had originally been a student of Krishnamacharya, and she was married to Bill Skelton, the a professor of music at Colgate University, and he took a group of students from Colgate every other year to Chennai, India,
yeah,
and had been doing it for a long, long time, like maybe even late 60s, but definitely or by early 70s. And um, he, in the course of their trips in India, she, uh, he got sick and nearly died. And as part of his recovery, he went. Someone told him to go see Krishnamacharya, and so he went and was dramatically helped by Krishnamacharya. And from that, Mary Lou got interested in yoga. And
yeah.
once Bill got better, he stopped practicing. But Mary Lou continued on,
Right.
and she became a very important, invitee of Mr. Deśikachar to the United States, etc. And in fact, Religiousness in Yoga is
Yeah.
that was really the
Right. Right.
beautiful first book of his. Was the was a month-long course that he gave at Colgate University in 1976 during what they called the January schedule, and he gave that as a month-long course. They recorded it, then they created a book out of it, and so
Yeah.
Martine was connected to. Her last name is Barat, Borat, and she was She's still teaching actually in Syracuse, and
Yeah. So in those days, Anne used to bring in people like them. She brought in Deborah Koran
mm-hmm,
to talk about Samkhya and the Bhagavad Gita, and Sonia Nelson, of course, for
yeah.
the chanting part.
Deborah is still
Uh,
teaching. She lives in Long Beach.
yes, yes.
Yeah, you got
And
all these handwritten notes, pages and pages and pages that you are expected to review
oh my
before
God. In
your
fact, we even had a book, a hardbound book from the 80s. I think it was published in 80, with nothing but stick figures
yeah,
and description of pranayama pieces.
yes,
And it was said, at least Mr. Desikachar said in his foreword, that Krishnamacharya had actually reviewed all the drawings and verified the names of the postures. So that
yes.
was our Bible then.
You can still get that book from the Krishnamacharya Yoga
They
Mandram.
have re-edited it. Yeah, yeah,
They've re-edited it. Okay,
yes,
the
yeah.
author is Smith, and I
Smith,
think
that's right.
that's like illustrated guide to asana and pranayama or something like that.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly it. An illustrated
and
guide. Yeah,
it the um that was a I mean it's such a useful book, but if they had taken the time to do the uh vinyasa kramas,
Oh, wow.
beginning and the steps and and stuff of it. It would,
Yeah.
but still, very useful. So you had all
Anyway,
these handwritten notes, and you had Smith, and
Smith, yes. And then a few more classes to them. So I got some sort of low-level certification. And I started team teaching with Anne, and then eventually started teaching on my own locally community stuff. And from the very beginning, I did what my teacher had done. And so I integrated the movement with the breath, with some reflections and some principles. And gradually, people were appreciating of the reflection part. So that gradually got a little bit longer as time went on. And that's a part that I began to enjoy. And then after a couple of years of working with Anne on Yoga Sutras, word for word, etc., she took me to Ojai in those days, Southern California, for a long weekend thing with Mr. Deśikachar, and she introduced her Davis group to him. And that's when it all started gelling for me, hearing him make a presentation. He has such a disarming, non-assuming manner, and he could put these concepts into such simple words and simple examples that you couldn't help but being totally taken in by that.
let
And
me just pause you for a second there,
yeah,
because I think that this is a part of him that was beloved by everyone, and that he was so humble and easy, such a disarming mannerism, and I mean he was so easy to just talk to and be there,
yeah,
um, and so kind, so nice. And then he would get up on the stage, or he would teach and be in class, and it's just like what he had to say just came in so easily. It was like so easily digested and understood, and it's like this profound
yeah,
profound ideas, and
yeah,
it was really stunning to be in his
yeah.
presence. Yeah.
So eventually I retired, bought a store, and I had more time to follow him. Whenever he came to the States, I tried to make it to his presentations,
Mm-hmm.
and that went on for several years. And I've absolutely treasured the few times where he actually addressed me directly with some point or some answer. Those moments have stayed with me a lot because there was so much to them. One time, out of the blue, he said, "I believe in a higher power is not a requirement, it's a choice." And I'd never said anything about being a secularist at that point, but somehow he saw through the doubt. And another time, he answered one of my questions by saying, "Worrying is like praying for something you don't want it to happen." And that struck me so much because I don't
Yeah.
pray, and yet there was a lot there to reflect about.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, he just could see through people.
Yeah, he
And
just had
you
the
have that
zinger.
skill too.
Mm.
I've watched you do the same thing. Think through a question and get to a point that the person may not have asked outright. And you are so very kind as you do that,
Thank you, Grazia.
that I try to do the same thing with my class. And whether I succeed or not, that's another issue. But one time in all these years of taking classes from you, I remember feeling totally stupid after asking a question. I mean, I still laugh about it when I think back of it, because you had us do a stretch against the wall, and I remember thinking, oh, the breathing is different than what I've always done. So I wanted to ask a question about it. And I raised my hand. But by the time you called on me, you had gone on to 2 or 3 different topics. And so when you called on me, I said, could you say something about the breath? And of course, I was thinking about the movement. And you looked at the camera, incredulous, and very slowly said, can I say something about the breath? I mean, you'd been talking about the breath for years.
And the answer is finally no.
So I felt so utterly stupid. So I said, no. I meant in that posture. Anyway.
Well, my sincere apologies. Yes.
It was my doing. Another time, Mr. Deśikachar came to lecture, and he went off topic for some reason, and he said, I'm feeling disturbed. And he told us the reason. He said, because his son had decided to choose a wife on his own. And so he went on explaining that the tradition in India, the parents have some influence on the decision, and that's because parents know their children so very well. They know their tendencies, they know their patterns, they know the reactions, etc. And so some influence will be beneficial in attempting to point out what might be a potential problem or something to be worked on by the couple before making such a step. And so it was a sort of explaining his own apprehension about that process, which was so disarming. And so it gave you a glimpse into how the person was, how he was as a person. Sort of a
and what honesty to say in the beginning in front of so many people. I'm out of sorts.
Yeah.
You know, you're all here to hear me teach, but I'm out of sorts because something is happening in my family that is very distressing for me.
Right.
I mean,
right. So,
whoa, okay.
Yeah. So it sort of gives you license to be yourself in your own classes, which is very useful.
You know, I want to pause on there too, because I just think that is in the one-on-ones with him, he was even more so that way. Being a yoga practitioner does not make you immune from the difficulties in life. He would share those in his one-on-one classes, like this such a thing is happening with my wife or with my son or with my daughter or like this, and here's the difficulty I'm in, here's the rock, here's the hard place, this is what I'm doing about it. And it was really stunning because it was such beautiful illustrations of the principles in action. And just exactly like you're saying, one comes away with the impression of like, oh, now this is really an expert practitioner. Not that they don't have any problems, but that they're able to navigate their problems with some grace and some humaneness, and to really be a human. And I think that is really, really, really critical to what we teach in yoga. So
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. He talked a lot about teachers' responsibilities and the student-teacher relationship. But I don't recall him ever using the word mentor, though,
No,
although I may have forgotten.
no, he's student teacher. Is how
Yeah,
he,
student
yeah,
teacher. And he used to say how, as teachers, we must find a way to keep in touch with ourselves and sustain that with a daily practice, be able to separate from the outside noise and sustain that. He also used to say that we need to fill our tank by practicing so that we can have the resources to give to our students. Um, I remember one time we were due to meet for one of these long weekends in Colorado, and it happened, 9/11 happened a couple of days before that. And so there were disruptions in flights and transportation, etc. The question, should we meet, should we not meet? But Mr. Deśikachar kept the meeting because he felt, and he explained it, he felt that people might need the relief of thinking about something else, and that would give them that would give them a way to be recharged, to be able to go back to their own students and help them out. So that we ended up talking, not going off topic, and talking about ahimsa a whole lot. In fact, I remember Kate giving a lot of talks on ahimsa.
Kate
Um,
Holcomb, yeah, longtime
Kate
student of
Holcomb.
Mr.
Yeah,
Deśikachar.
what?
She's also still teaching in San Francisco. Yeah,
Yeah, I saw her name recently. Yeah, what does nonviolence means to you, and how do you deal with it, and do you really need to kill that earwig, uh, that kind of thing. So we changed the topic
yeah.
as appropriate.
When that happened, um, he was in Atlanta, and um, and then of course all flights were canceled for, I don't know, at least 3 to 4 days afterwards.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
flights happened in the United States at all, and the workshop was scheduled something like 1 week after it was right after 9/11.
yeah. It was on the 15th.
Okay, yeah, so 4 days later, yeah. So
Yeah.
my memory of this is that someone drove him from Atlanta, but I don't
Yes.
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't remember the details, but yes, someone
yeah.
had driven him.
And during the um, during the actual attacks, so he told the story later that he himself was disturbed. I'm in a foreign country.
Yeah,
It's being attacked. Am I, do I need to get back to India? How quickly can I leave, etc.? And he was staying with the Martins, and he said, well, I'm going to go for a walk. So he went for a walk, and he took his chanting book with him, and he went, and on the walk he stopped in a park and sat under a tree and started chanting. And he said, I chose a particularly difficult chant because my mind was not settled, and so I needed the difficulty of the pronunciation, etc., to hold my attention. And a long chant, and something like an hour or something. At the end of the chant, I looked up, and there was a whole bunch of people who had just sat down and were just listening to him chanting. And he said, after that experience, I knew, no, I have to stay here.
yeah.
This is what I'm doing. We'll go forward with the workshop, and here we are.
Something else I've heard him say many times is that the teacher is responsible for making the student independent. The teacher has a shovel to break that dam, but then it's up to the student to direct the water wherever he needs it. And somehow that has stayed with me for a long time. My mentor is way too gentle to use a shovel. He uses little piercing, makes little holes in the dam, really tiny holes, so that I don't even feel it at the time. But after a while, I see a little seepage coming through, and maybe something will happen, and some insight or some change will happen. And then I realize, oh, that's what he was doing. And it's a very subtle type of thing, and it takes time to work its way through. But someone who has the experience and the clarity to see through us, to see our mind patterns, and can make suggestion to redirect, it's so very useful. But it takes so much patience on both sides.
On both sides.
Yeah.
This is a part of yoga as a tradition, as a life path that I think takes some time to appreciate and has not translated into Western culture very easily. People think of yoga as a kind of exercise done in a group, makes you feel good, or as some sort of spiritual something where you're renouncing. And if you look at the yoga tradition for the past couple thousand years, it has come down from one person to another, to another, to another. It's like it's never been passed down in a broad way. It's always been passed down in deep individual ways. And that ongoing, deep, quite intimate, really, relationship between the student and the teacher it takes some time to appreciate. In our culture, therapy is something that you do for a limited amount of time when you're really having a difficult time.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a lot of utility in that. That's wonderful. And then it's only been in recent couple of years, whatnot, that something like life coaching has become popular, and you get a coach to help you in your job or in your relationships or whatnot, et cetera. It's like, this is what yoga's model has been for 2,000 years. One person guiding another. That is not overnight. It's years in the making, really. So interesting. The one saying that Mr. Deśikachar, not the one, a frequent saying that he would, that really always is there for me, is close the file, which was, on your desktop, if you have too many files open, then the whole computer it slows down and you can't use it. And so what's the best thing to do? Well, the best thing to do is you got to close the files that you're not using, and then go back and restart the computer, and then it works great when all of the space has been opened up. And that he also would tell a story about a old monk and his apprentice were traveling between monasteries, and they came across a stream which was swollen from the heavy rains, and there was a nun who was there. The old monk says to the nun, "Would you like some help?" "Yes." So she gets on his back, and he carries her across and puts her down, and the apprentice and the monk go their way, and she goes the other way. And then at night in the new monastery, as they've gone to bed, and the old monk says to the apprentice, "Is there anything from the day you like to ask me for?" And he said, "You touched a woman." and the old monk says, "Oh, I see you are still carrying her. I put her down on the other side of the stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard him tell that story too. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean and it's so true. It's like
Yeah.
when you have something going on in your life, it's hard to pay attention to anything else.
Yeah.
And just like you said about when he started about like, I have this, my son has made this choice that is, he himself was, well, I should say Krishnamacharya was a very devout man, and he really upheld the rituals. He
Mhm.
did all of the rituals, etc. And Mr. Deśikachar really rebelled against that. I'm sure you know the story of, Mr. Deśikachar studied Yoga Sutra with his father 7 times,
Mhm.
from one end to the other, from the beginning to the end. And the first time that he was studying it with his father, he said, "No, I don't want to hear about God. I don't want to know about God. I don't believe in God." So when Krishnamacharya got to Yoga Sutra 123, which is, the the surrender to higher power, Krishnamacharya said to him, "Well, this doesn't apply to you, so we'll skip this section and we'll go to the next section." And then the second time through, when they got there, he said the same thing, and Mr. Deśikachar said, "Well, since I am teaching, just for intellectual sake, I ought to know what it says. So let's hear what it says, etc." And so Mr. Deśikachar was really not one who was at all interested in upholding forms for the sake of the form. He was all about function. And it's so interesting that in him, with his son choosing a love marriage, that's against the form, that it's upsetting. And how refreshing that the honesty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds like meditation is your main interest these days.
Yeah. And the most satisfying class that I had early on, I was teaching early on, was corporate yoga.
Okay.
I taught a noontime class for a plant genetics research outfit here in town. And the employees were under such high pressure to produce results like every day from the research. And the poor people were just frazzled. So, as a perk, they chose a lunch hour time to do something different. And so yoga happened, and I happened at that time. And they loved the fact that they had this time to decompress. It was just once a week, but they all claimed that they would be back to their jobs, and they felt so much better, and they felt they were accomplishing so much more, that we kept that going for a couple of years. And I think the company went bankrupt after a while. But anyway, that was.
They needed more yoga. They needed more weekly yoga classes. That's what happened. Yeah.
But that was so satisfying. And right after that, I started taking your classes of meditation. And that was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that cemented my interest, because your lecture were on the theory and confirmed what I had experienced on my own in the process. And then I taught a class for the university.
Hold on a second. Before we go on, I just want to interrupt and say that, for those who don't know, so this is an ongoing class we have on Wednesday mornings that I teach. It's 7 a.m. Pacific. It's called Yoga for Meditation. And it's a half an hour practice class. And then every other week, it's actually twice a month. So sometimes it's 3 weeks, but every other week, we take an hour to discuss the structure of the class. So that's 7:45 to 8:45. We run late a lot, but point is that we then discuss the structure of the meditation class. What was the movements beforehand? What was the breathing that we did? What was the structure of how we put our attention and where, etc.? And what that class is attempting uh, to do is serve longtime students, or really teachers of meditation, who are interested in how do you create meditation practices, because yoga is a experience, a science of experience. It's interested in how our experiences change the way our system functions, and that's on a emotional level, on a behavioral level, on attention, mental level, intellect level, as well as breath and body level, right? So we take the time to explore what is happening or what happened in the class and tie people's experiences to the structure and why the structure produced the experiences that it did. It's super fun. I have to say, I love that class.
It
I
is. I do
love that
too.
class.
I do too. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
And I imitate a lot of the stuff that you do. One class that I taught for the university here was an introduction to meditation. And the people in the class wanted to continue practicing. And so they arranged with the local church to give us space for a once a week meeting. And so we started this about 8 years ago. And this group has been so cohesive, and we've opened it up to church people too. So we've had some influx and outflux. But they have attended now for 8 years, and lately we've been on Zoom, unfortunately. But that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes with the pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, and I call this Yoga Sutra meditation because I'm still integrating all the tools, and I do cover some of the principles. So over the years, I've introduced some of the terms, some of the principles from chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras. And then I went through chapter 3 with them, one sutra at a time. So they're well versed.
That's so great. I love it. It's so great.
They're so versed on the terms, and I still use everything, even on Zoom, although it's getting harder and harder to do. And I'm very cautious about movements because I can't see them very well. Mm-hmm. And that gives me some qualms about what am I doing. So I keep it very safe. But we do stuff sitting, standing. Last month, I even did it lying down because I thought it was time for them to do something different. I changed the focus from the sutras to maybe some tapas focus, habits, working on habits, or often it's a svadhyaya focus, reflecting on your own tendencies, your own stuff. Mm-hmm. I do throw in stuff like Ayurvedic concepts about daily routines, about seasonal shifts, about food. Whether they want to hear it or not, I throw it in.
Yeah,
You've
fantastic.
got to do something to keep it interesting because these are not teachers. They're just students. So I do that.
Well, what's amazing is that you have the same group of people coming every week for 8 years, and something is obviously feeding them. They're obviously getting a lot out of the class because people don't stick around for that length of time if they're not getting something out of it. And I think that meditation has this. A lot of people think of meditation as being no thoughts. In my household, my dad and I have this running joke about because in the afternoon I have an afternoon practice. So I when we have family time or whatever, I leave in the afternoon and I gone for an hour, and then I practice and come back. And so um, my dad will ask me, are you going to study your navel?
Yes.
And my retort is, got to check for lint. So, but like, I don't think he has an appreciation for what is meditation, or that, just in our culture, it's like super relaxation where there's no thoughts, and you zone out or whatnot. And, what, nothing could be further from the truth. What is yoga? It is a conscious choosing of the placement of your attention, and then where you put your attention, there will be some qualities. So if I put my attention on a mountain, or I'll put my attention on the sky, very different qualities. If I'm reflecting about some aspect of a relationship that is troubling me, or if I'm reflecting about some aspect of a relationship that is extremely satisfying, different qualities. And wherever we put our attention, some kind of experience will arise if we can maintain that connectedness. And I think that meditation in this way is not well represented in the West. It's people take people on meditations, which are just kind of like visual journeys, and now you're this and now you're that, etc. And the people are having a nice time. It's a nice experience, etc. But it's the experience that's being fed them. It's not something that's arising
They
within
come
them.
up themselves. Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of your father, my husband says, did you kick butt in yoga?
Yes, I won. I'm undefeated.
I mean, this is after 30 years, still there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Uh,
hope it's not irreverent, but I also throw in some whimsy. And I
mhm,
learned this from Carrie Heater.
mhm.
Um, a few weeks ago, I did a meditation on your favorite item of clothing when you were a kid, or when you were a young teenager.
Mhm.
Sometimes something like this tend
I
to
love it. I
keep
love
the
it.
interest in them.
Well, so
And I
much can
really,
arise out of that, right? So
yes,
much can arise out of that. I mean, your favorite item of clothing when you were a teenager, like, first of all, it's probably not inaccessible. Probably something comes up.
yeah,
And when it comes up, there's going to be emotions,
yeah, there's,
and those emotions have a context, and remembering those emotions and the context of those emotions uh, gives a lot of insight into what was going on in my life. What were my pressures? What were my release valves? How did I manage all the things that I was thinking and feeling and being pushed or pulled to do or not to do, etc.? How did all that come in? And that is where we're forming the behaviors that are our go-to behaviors for the rest of our life. So to have some insight into that, I'm sure was like, I mean, you say whimsy because it's interesting, it's fun. Who's gonna think of that as like a meditation object, right? Who's gonna think of that? But oh my God, I'm the 53-year-old, 13-year-old.
yes,
Please help me.
yes,
So interesting.
yeah, yeah, it is.
We should mention, just as that Carrie Heater also has a really fantastic book, an inside look into meditation. Her last name is Heeter, and that's really well worth checking out. Written from the perspective of Vini Yoga, particularly related to, Chikitsa healing and those kinds of areas. Really, really a fantastic book. So I want some other examples of meditation objects or things that you're using.
Right after Justice Ginsburg died, I did a meditation on justice.
Mm.
How do you view what is just, what is unjust for you? Where do you think your biases are? How do you adjust that knowledge or that feeling of justice? How
Very interesting.
situational is your justice? Those
Very
kinds of
interesting.
questions. It seemed appropriate.
Yeah.
Because particularly that day, it was a group of women, not quite my age, I'm much older than they are, but who had grown up with the justice, seeing her being elected and being familiar with her philosophy. It seemed like an appropriate thing to do that day.
Yeah. So interesting. I think this is another thing about meditation that we don't, in the West, again, we don't really appreciate that much, is that it has such flexibility in its purpose. It has so many different things that it can do. Definitely, it can be used to help someone relax or to calm down or de-stress, etc. But it those are kind of shallow purposes, and really deeper things are, it has the power to help us come to know something we don't know, and to learn something. So that could be, as you mentioned earlier, about ourselves, swadhyaya, or it can be something about a situation that we're involved in that we have not seen, or it can be some kind of understanding about how we should respond to something, or there's all kinds of the learning is very broad, all the different kinds of learning that's there. Also, meditation can help us develop capacities that we don't have before, like the ability to say no, or the ability to talk in front of a crowd, or to make a decision. There's so many different things that we block ourselves from doing. And through meditation, the opening of our capacities is really possible. And I'm not sure how widely known that is as in our culture, as a real idea of meditation, that we can really be meditating in order to release grief, or be meditating in order to develop the strength to take some actions that I've been dreading taking, that I need to take, or that, like this. And finally, meditation is also really helpful for this exploration of being. What is it to be human? What is it to be alive, right? To be in relationship with anything. It really comes to the core of why are we here, right? And all of these different things are possible. And what I hear you saying, Grazia, in your class is that over 8 years you've had the opportunity to explore a lot of it, and there is at the same time no end to what you can do. It's so it's very interesting.
In my case, it's extremely helpful in the process of aging, how viewing your own aging, not just in the physical sense, but in the sense of changing how you view yourself and changing what's important to you. It seems like so many things that were important to me 30 years ago, I really don't make an impact on me anymore. I mean, yes, I do mourn, and I'm done mourning my perfect Utkatasana. But it's not important anymore that I do that. And it's not, there is something about detaching from certain things and not feeling that you're losing anything. It's hard to explain, but I'm beginning to understand that process.
Yeah.
And that only comes from spending time with yourself.
Yeah, very often detachment is talked about as like as something that you do. I'm not so sure if that's possible. It's rather than like letting go of it. It may be that we are more tightly connecting, grabbing hold of, moving towards something else. And in yoga, that is something essential deep within us.
The word that comes up is santosha.
Mm-hmm.
There is something that makes me content with where I am. It doesn't matter if I don't do Utkatasana anymore. I'm really happy doing my stays and my breathing. That's more rewarding now than being able to go all the way to the floor.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, if I had perfect clarity, how would I see this? How would I see that person? How would I see my husband without attachment? Those are the kinds of things that you go to as life changes and becomes less important.
Yeah. Such a nice place to end. We do get something, we're connected somewhere within us in a way that is very deep, very meaningful,
Yeah.
very satisfying. And the deeper that happens, the more that happens, the less things that we used to think were important are important. And it goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Grazia, so nice to have you on today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
If people are interested in knowing more about you or finding your teaching, where do they go?
I don't have a place right now.
Do they have a website?
No.
Okay.
I'm non-social.
Deeply connected to yourself.
They can go to the Yoga Well and ask about me.
Okay. Maybe we'll put your email in the liner notes of
Okay.
and that way you can find her email and connect with her in that way. Super. Thanks again. So good to see you.
Thank you.